My name is Jack Bybee, and I welcome you to the second edition, the second showing of the Jack Chat Show. You
Go
can
to
go to the Jack
jackchatshow.com.
to see it recorded in archive. The, the premise of the show is to help reduce the end of life anxiety. I've done a little bit of research, but before I go there and get into the show entirely, my business plan called called for in the past tense called for expanding the possibility of the Jack Chat show through Arizona here in the desert southwest, where the skies are blue and the mountains are bluer, where the cactus and the saguaro are prickly and the rattlesnakes rattle. Other than that, as I was saying, I'd only planned to expand here in Arizona. As you probably know, the first show, the premiere of the Jack Chat show, went live last Tuesday. Over the weekend, I hooked up my analytics program to the website, and to my amazement and astonishment and delight, I realized that instead of talking to an American audience, I'm actually addressing an international audience. There was, as of this morning, a viewer from Canberra, Australia. There have been viewers from Freiburg in Switzerland. Hope I'm pronouncing that right. From the UK, I still don't know what city you're in. And even the biggest delight I've had is to know that there are two viewers along the banks of the Volga in Russia. To you in Russia, I send you Ura, peace, with an uppercase P, right? I hope I pronounced that. And oh, by the way, if you think I'm going to learn more Russian, the answer is no. It's not going to happen. I hope I pronounced Ura correctly. Okay. I've come to the realization that it's very difficult to define something you cannot measure. There is no way that I can define death. And what is even more interesting, as far as I'm concerned, I have researched a little bit, mainly in the Christian Bible, and there are only two instances, one in Daniel and one in Isaiah, where I can find any mention of what happens on the other side. Later in the show, I hope to have an interview with a friend of mine who will be a philosopher and an artist here in Tucson, who will be telling us about Plato and about his views on the soul, the psyche, the spirit, and what he thought back in antiquity could happen when the soul, if the soul left the body, and if it did, where it went. What is death? What can we expect? As I said in the first show, the spirit leaves body. That's what happened to me. And a story I could tell you now. I was in hospital in Cape Town, South Africa. I was very, very ill. A little nurse, an Afrikaner nurse, a cute little brunette, and I got rather friendly the times I was conscious, and she'd come to ruffle up my pillows, and I suppose we started flirting a little bit on one thing and another. To my amazement, I had I flatlined. That wasn't the amazing part, but up the tunnel, and as I mentioned last week, on the way up the tunnel, it's quite an astounding experience. I had never traveled so fast, And I do hope by next week to have a JPEG or an image that I can provide to you and show you a sketch that I've done of what the tunnel looks like so that you can be prepared and you can see where probably there's no certainty about anything, but more than likely that's what you are going to encounter when your spirit leaves the body. This nurse, I call her Anita. Uh, uh, in my experience, I looked back and I saw Anita and her parents at the nurse's home, and I saw a car salesman drive up with a red MGB. Now, in those days in South Africa, it was an absolute no-no. It just didn't happen that parents would give a car to their children. But for Anita, she was the only child. She had left the farm, come to the hospital, become a nurse, and she was graduating. On top of that, it was her 21st birthday, which is a big deal in the English-speaking world like South Africa. I look back and I see Anita marvelously excited, ecstatic. She jumps into the sports car, up along the side of the nurse's home onto a highway that is carved into the side of Table Mountain, and she goes screaming down the highway into a hairpin bend, loses control, and wraps herself around a cement telephone pole. And that was the end of the earth plane existence of Nurse Anita. Believe it or not, on the other side, I'm still trying to figure out where I am and what I am and why I am. And all of a sudden, there's the spirit of Nurse Anita. And I said, "But Anita, what are you doing here?" And she said, "Oh, I've come to fluff up your pillows." Nice try. This is not a hospital ward. I didn't know where I was, but I knew it wasn't a hospital ward. So we looked around, and Anita said to me, "I see the boundary. Every occurrence on the other side has a boundary. In my case, it was an old, rustic, old wooden fence. I love wood." And Anita said to me, "I must go on now, and I will cross the boundary, but you must not follow me, because then your life will truly be over. You can still go back." Eventually, yes, I returned. And in hospital ward again, when I was recuperating, I didn't realize this, but there was a nurse at my bed, my neurologist, and some medical students. And I was telling my neurologist exactly what I have just related. And this nurse at the foot of the bed had stood frozen. And suddenly, the poor girl just let out a scream. "But I know Anita. We were the best of friends. I know she's dead. How can you know these things?" And she turned around and fled from the hospital wall. Go figure. That's life. That's what happened to me. Now, the only differentiation, as I've said before, between a near-death experiencer like myself and yourselves is that we, the near-death experiencers, have memories of the other side, what I like to call memories of eternity. That's a great title for my new book that's coming out, hopefully by the fall. But that's another matter. Here in America, I believe the average age of the expected life of the average American is now starting to push 80, 90. A good number of us are going to live into our hundreds and are living into our hundreds. But sooner or later, the time will come that we do have to shuffle off, as Shakespeare put it. And it's not a very nice thing to think of. But again, the bard stated, from hour to hour we ripe and ripe. And then from hour to hour, well, we go downhill. We rot and rot. I don't like rotting. I'm still, well, I like to fool myself and I'm still ripening, but I know to the difference. Anyway, what is a definition of death? How can I define something that I cannot measure? The point is, and this is a complete contradiction in terms, as Val will hopefully point out. We don't die. Oh, but you're dead. No, I'm not. And many people who do die and are able to report it, the near-death experiencer, have stated that when they died, they didn't realize they had died. Why? Because they weren't dead. They were still alive. Or rather, they were conscious. And being conscious, they could think, they could feel, they could see, they could move. But the body, the physical body, had lost all vital signs. The EEG was flat. Basically, that led to the expression of the flat line. Anyway, Raymond Moody, the medical doctor who, as a medical student, defined the near-death experience, has stated that death is an annihilation of consciousness. Well, as much as I respect Dr. Moody's research, no, it's not. Death is an annihilation of earth plane conscious, but you're still conscious. Of that, I can assure. Pim van Lommel has, I believe, coined the term death consciousness. And I'm trying to contact Dr. van Lommel in the Netherlands to see if he can come on the show. I'm going to be interviewing Val Mustaine, a friend of mine who has taught community college at the community college level and is a philosopher and artist. And Val is going to be telling us about Plato, his views on the soul and death and the psyche, and a whole lot more, I hope. Over to you, Val. Well, over to you. Educate myself as simply as you can and our audience as well, please, about Plato.
Plato's understanding of the soul and death are very interesting. We think that many of his ideas came out of the Middle East. He certainly traveled into India and that area. So some of these ideas probably came out of that part of the world, but where it entered into his philosophy is the idea that the soul and the body are two separate entities that join at birth and separate again at death. And when the soul separates from the body, and really, I think you would think of it as your consciousness or your awareness that's separating from the body, that happens at death. And then at death, the soul actually enters into, ultimately, the world of ideals, the things that are perfect. And it has an opportunity to experience that. But the soul then, with that, goes back down into the world and reincarnates in another body, and then lives another life. The whole idea is that each life you live, hopefully, a little better than the last life, with the idea of becoming essentially as perfect a person as you can be.
Okay, how interesting. Well, do you just for myself, is there, as far as you are concerned, as far as Plato is concerned, is there a difference between the soul and the spirit?
I don't think that he would make that distinction, no.
Right.
Because the soul really would be the spiritual part of the being. It's that which, as I say, is associated with consciousness. You know, if one were to talk about exteriorization, it's that part of you that would exteriorize. So it's not separate from spirit.
No.
Really, it's really what you're dealing with in terms of ancient philosophy is whether or not the soul is immanent in the physical body, manifests at the same time as and only in a physical body, or whether it's manifest separate from and therefore can operate separate from the body by reincarnating.
Okay, well, here's something I turned up last night on Wikipedia that I don't want to throw, but it really did interest me, that Plato, who was drawing on Socrates, considered the psyche as the essence of the person. Could you comment on that?
Well, ultimately, you know, again, psyche, if you get into very fine details, is psyche exactly the same as soul or spirit, etc. But yeah, the essence of who the human being is obviously is going to be his consciousness. Whether you define that as psyche, which actually soul is just another word for psyche. I mean,
yeah,
soul,
that's what I was hoping you'd say.
And so really what you're dealing with is essentially the same thing. But it is, well, it's very easy just to get into the linguistics of it and not really deal with what the experience is. And the experience, I think, for Plato was one that the psyche, the soul, whatever you want to call it, is separable from and does, in fact, separate from the body at death. And in a sense, there's a soul transmigration, and it comes back and chooses another body, however it does that, and reincarnates.
It's on that latter point that I'm not too certain what happens with reincarnation, but I really, why I threw these three concepts at you was because I'm confused, and I think a lot of of our listeners are confused about the psyche, the soul, and the spirit. For certain, in my case, when I had the near-death experience, I was in what I term spirit, but I was fully conscious and fully aware of what was happening on the other side. This is a final question, but can you comment on anything that Plato might have come up with about awareness on the other side of consciousness, in death consciousness?
I don't think he dealt with it. There's an assumption that there's some kind of awareness, but the exact nature, at least as far as I haven't read everything of Plato. I'm not going to make an universal statement about Plato, but my understanding of Plato is no, not really. But there's something, because the way he speaks about the philosopher king, who is really the person who has fully materialized his or her spiritual nature, psychic nature, whatever you want to call that. They have achieved the highest level of knowledge. They are aware of truth and beauty and knowledge. They have emerged from the cave of darkness that we live in life, and they're aware. And in that awareness, though, after death, they make a conscious choice, even though they don't need to return into life, because there's nothing that life can give them. They return into life, they reincarnate again because of an obligation to help their fellow spirits really achieve this higher awareness of spirit, to become one with truth, beauty, and knowledge. So there's a real, in a sense, it's similar to a bodhisattva viewpoint, that even though you have achieved enlightenment yourself, in that state of enlightenment, you would understand that you have an obligation to other humans, at least, if not the universe as a whole, to come back and attempt to bring all of it back up to a level of highest consciousness.
Well, thank you so much, Val. That's this should be broadcast very shortly. I'd like to ask you back. The pilot one is the eight shows of the Jack show, and pilot 2 will be coming up in the fall. And I'd love to ask you back to develop a little bit more about the spirit, the soul, and the psyche. So thank you very much, Val Mustaine. We'll chat to you again. Many thanks.
Thank you, Jack. I'd love to come back because I have lots of other things to say.
Thanks, Val.
Okay.
Our time is almost up, but for the next show, I will be focusing, there won't be an interview, but I will be focusing on the life review. The issue that I think keeps you've heard of the changes in the near-death experience. Well, you won't believe the changes in me. Well, that's because I feel of the life review. And I honestly think that the life review is the most important aspect of any life. It's what we need to learn in the next life, because our lives here, we've missed opportunity, and there are lessons we need to learn. Before I go, you will hear me talk about the perfection of the other side. You will hear me talk about how wonderful it is. But on that score, none of us, you, me, are all here to learn a lesson. Any unexpected death, any hurt that we create, upsets the balance of the universe. And I mean hurt for others or hurt for ourselves. And in hurt for ourselves, I'm talking about suicide. Please don't. It's not an option. The lessons you are supposed to learn, you're supposed to learn, whether you like them or not. There are lessons you have to learn. Suicide is the coward's way out. I know you're not a coward. Don't do it. If you absolutely feel you are going to commit suicide, you're going to kill yourself, please pick up the phone, go find someone you can trust, talk to them, please. And remember, you might be hurting yourself, but how many others are you hurting as well? I don't believe that at the very least there isn't one person who loves you and loves you deeply. Suicide is not an option. Those who love you, who remain behind, will never get over that, because they know only too well that you just have to come back and start all over again to learn those lessons. Next week, we talk about the life review. I'll tell you another story, and we can go from there. Please send me your comments, send me your queries, your questions. I'll try. That's all I can do. So from here, the desert of Arizona, where the sun shines and the mountains are blue, may you walk in peace, journey in delight. May the blessings of the Perfect One be with you and yours always. Jack out.